Funding for this program was provided by the Annenberg CPB project.
Additional support provided by California State University at Hayward.
In a bold investigation, instructors from 8 California State University campuses joined forces to examine and share strategies on facilitating difficult dialogues. Difficult dialogues are those classroom discussions that trigger intense emotions and can lead to a range of responses, from fireworks to silence.
Why are some folk so angry?
Any topic can generate emotional responses, but among the most likely are race, culture, gender, class, and sexual orientation.
We've had situations.
In this fast-changing world, nurturing honest inquiry and exchange becomes an increasingly critical skill for faculty. Managing difficult dialogues face-to-face in a single classroom is challenging enough, but in this study, the challenge was heightened by the addition of 2 or more electronic classrooms. Faculty had to communicate to their on-site classes as well as classrooms at different campuses across television screens. This tape documents some of the lessons they learned about difficult dialogues. The participants were Dr. Sally Murphy, communications professor at California State University at Hayward.
And who are the Hello, Monterey Bay. Okay, let's talk some about your reactions both to the video and the readings and your understandings of how it is we come to know who we are and present that who we are to wider communities.
Dr. Otis Scott, professor of ethnic studies at California State University, Sacramento.
What I want each group to do is to construct a definition, a working understanding, if you will, within your group of affirmative action. You're responding to the question, if you will, if you can imagine a parentheses, what is it? Right? What is it?
And Dr. Elizabeth Jackson, professor of communication and English at CSU Bakersfield.
Today we're looking at a film by a maker named Marlon Riggs. He specialized in films that reflected difficult dialogues concerning issues of racism and in some instances homophobia.
Brother to brother, 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 brother to brother.
In California, I learned the touch and taste of snow. Cruising white boys, I played out adolescent dreams, deferred.
Let me touch it, let me taste it, let me taste it, let me suck it, let me lick it, let me taste it, let me lick it, let me suck it, let me touch it, let me taste it, let me lick it, let me lick it, let me taste it, let me suck it, let me touch it.
I was just totally overwhelmed by the whole thing, but it was very interesting, but yet very hard to understand, kind of. The issues that I don't disagree with it, but it made me feel a little uncomfortable with it.
Well, specifically, Lisa, what parts made you feel uncomfortable?
Well, the parts when they were, in the beginning, when they were kind of touching each other, and the 2 men that were touching each other, I just kind of felt a little squeamish, a little bit, and kind of looked down. It was just kind of, I don't know. I think that when you're out in the public and you see 2 people, I think they should do it on their own, in the privacy of their own, where there's nobody around, where they're kissing. I don't know, that's just me. That was the part where I felt uncomfortable.
If it makes you uncomfortable, that's all right. We can appreciate that, but yes, ma'am.
You made a blanket statement that it should be kept in the privacy of your home, and I just wanted to clarify that. I have no problem with you feeling uncomfortable with that, because there are many people out there, and it has nothing to do with homophobia. It just has to do with personal preference and acceptability in your own brain.
I don't think that there's a big difference between black and homosexual and white and homosexual or Oriental and homosexual. I think they're all going to have the same problem. I think these just happen to be black.
Becky makes a very, very interesting point here, which I'm going to just help her with, because she does bring it up in terms of specific cultures responding differently to issues of homophobia. Certain cultures deal with this issue markedly different, and I think that one of the points that Marlon Riggs was making was that there is a double kind of whammy, being both black and having to deal with everything that's going on in the world concerning that, and then confounding it with then being gay as well. Okay, yes, I see a lot of responses on this end.
It's easy to understand why homophobia or racism can generate a difficult dialogue, but once fueled, the challenge for faculty is to know when and how to respond to students, to engage and encourage students in an honest exchange of ideas.
Why did Marlon Riggs feel the need to express himself in this manner?
Over the course of the study, faculty came together to assess and reflect on their experiences. The talks were moderated by nationally respected multicultural psychologist and CSU Hayward professor, Dr. Daryl Wing Su.
All of us have been taught that you teach content, and what it comes down to with this is that you've got to be able to process emotive, affective reactions that are going on, and in some sense we're asking all of us to also be psychologists in some sense, besides just and that's what makes it so difficult to deal with. But pursuing the feelings, I think, are crucial to it, in addition to dealing with the content issues that are occurring in the group.
To me, those are real teachable moments, when you get their real responses, no matter how they're charged emotionally. To me, this is very important. A lot of people seem to think that the teaching of multiculturalism should be sanitized, and it should be devoid of emotionality. And I find that that's virtually impossible to do in anything that I've ever taught. We have something that I have noticed in my 7 years of teaching issues related to multiculturalism called a politeness protocol. That's what I suggest that it is. And this is where largely students don't want to get too low down and funky when they want to discuss something fairly substantive. They want to be polite. They don't necessarily want to offend either the professor or one another.
And if you ask what prevents us from really truly dialoguing honestly about it, I think it comes down to the issue of two levels of what is going on. One of them is that many people are afraid that what they say is going to appear racist or homophobic to others. But besides that, even beyond that, I think the greatest fear they have is a realization that they indeed do have racist thoughts and behaviors and are homophobic, and they do everything possible to try to conceal this. I mean, whether it's conscious or unconscious, deliberate or not, it affects the overall interaction, so that if we understand that, it comes to the issue of how do we break through that.
What you have to do is reinforce the idea for them that they're not going to be punished because they bring forth their gut responses.
I would say the critical issue in creating a difficult dialogue is to create a sense of safety in the classroom. That students have to feel safe in expressing their thoughts first, I think, and then their emotions, because the whole culture mitigates against much public emotional expression. And I think I work too hard on the safety issue and don't push the students hard enough in terms of my own difficulty in managing difficult dialogues.
Creating a sense of safety in the classroom, where students are willing to risk sharing their thoughts and feelings, sets the stage for difficult dialogues. Back in her classroom, Dr. Sally Murphy leads a three-way discussion on language and identity.
American citizenship. So language is important to the smaller community as a marker of identity. Is it equally important to the larger community as a marker of identity? To middle-class white America, is language equally important?
No. Well, no, because their language is the popular language. For the Chicano people, the language that they speak in their homes and that they were speaking on the farms, and those who grew up, say, in a middle class, like that one reading, kind of don't feel a connection. But when I don't know necessarily whether you need to legislate it and say, look, English. I mean, if the but I don't know. I'm confused now.
I mean, it's an issue. Sociolinguists and political linguists, people who look at the role of language in forming nation states and identity, mark exactly what we have been talking about, that language is critical to shared identity. I think the questions become quite complicated when you look at who gets to decide which language is the official language.
So does English say that you're an American? If I come here and speak English, I'm an American?
I think you're definitely going to be identified as an American more readily than if you come speaking a different language, yeah.
So it's a way to assimilate?
Yeah. I'm not saying you have to, just saying that if you do speak English, you're going to be more easily identified as an American.
Well, why do you have to be identified as an American? Why is that?
It's your choice. You don't have to. It's your choice.
Let me step in here for a couple of reasons. We're tossing around some terms here, which in our typical fashion in this class, we've not been careful to define so that we're sure that we share a common understanding. And when Zoe asked what it means to be an American, some of the take on this has had to do with citizenship. Some of this has to do with an identification with a particular cultural group. Some of this has to do with language. And I'm also hearing a distinction between who is the identifier. Are we talking about...
Back in the discussion group, faculty talked about their role when difficult dialogues heat up. Should you deflect the heat by going for the content instead of the emotions? And do you reveal your own feelings on the issue?
As individuals engaged in this type of activity, we really have to realize what our social impact is. And the social impact that we have is often based upon our race, our gender. A black man who is doing the dialogue might evoke a different reaction than you. As an Asian man, it might evoke a different reaction as well. And knowing that becomes a source of strength of how we handle, I think, the environment that we work in. In some sense, motto to all the participants that we too are products of our cultural conditioning. I have these biases and stereotypes. I'm going to be first and admit them to you and make it safer for others to begin to talk about those issues as well, and then to really, I think, go after the feelings.
And I really appreciate what you said about modeling behavior. I refused to say initially what I felt about it because I want them to come forward first with their own feelings, and I don't want to confound their responses by first giving my own.
I heard both Liz and Daryl Sue talk about two different ways of creating safety. One is to be disclosive ourselves about our emotions, and I'm drawn to that strategy because I tend to be a disclosive teacher. And another is to not tell students what they ought to feel by being the first to disclose, and I think that's the tension that Liz is talking about.
I would suggest that polite conversation, meaning a civil conversation, may indeed accomplish all of those. Take the gloves off. That we can have a very substantive conversation. We can have a conversation that takes us right to the bone, to the marrow of the issues. That we don't always have to be raging and uncivil on the other end of the spectrum. In order to have honesty, intellectual or otherwise, characterize the discourse.
I worry a lot about asking students to be more vulnerable than to demand vulnerability when they're not willing to put it out there. I think that there is an ethical issue in how we handle it, and I don't know the resolution to it.
you can push students to a point, and then you risk maybe shutting them down, where, like, well, I'm not going to say anything, I'm not going to pretend, I'll just go through the motions. And that's a very unsettling feeling for me, because then I'm working harder to try to open the students back up. But it's important to push towards, in quotes, the truth, and to try to get to the marrow of the issues, and to get all the feelings on the table and the perspectives on the table. But we do so oftentimes at considerable risk. I'm wondering how many of us
In the classroom, Dr. Scott and his students talk about affirmative action.
Why are some folk so angry? Angry to the point of mobilizing, to the point of contributing tens of thousands of dollars to defeat affirmative action programs and policies.
But I think that one of the major reasons cited for people being against affirmative action is that people are giving special privileges for being in a group, when actually they're not.
There needs to be a clear understanding of what affirmative action really is. It's been misrepresented, mispresented all over this country. It's caused incredible problems between various groups.
They don't want to know what affirmative action was back in the Johnson era. They don't want to know what it was all about. They only know what it is now and how it's affecting them right now. And they only see where, speaking about the federal contracts, that those disadvantaged businesses they're the only ones getting the contracts. They're making hand over fist money, while small, white-owned businesses can't even bid on contracts to get a piece of that pie. In the beginning, affirmative action was written for people who felt that they were discriminated against. I think that it's starting to turn to whereas people losing jobs, not getting federal contracts, they're feeling discriminated against now. So it's human nature, it's fear, it's what we know, we don't want to learn anything else. It's what we see and how it affects us personally.
Acknowledging the students' emotional responses is as important as recognizing one's own cultural conditioning, as Dr. Scott discovered.
Point about small white businesses, that was a gut reaction. Yeah. I mean that was coming from a deep place, because she said that her uncles have lost out on those contracts, you see, because they're in quotes white, small contractors.
I think that there were feelings all over the place here. Yeah, there was anger, there was defensiveness, there was fear of loss. There were some feelings of hopelessness that were coming on. That's what makes dealing with this so difficult, because it is more than an intellectual exercise.
For me, an important part of this course has been to learn to pay more close attention to the ways that students learn this stuff, and particularly predominantly Anglo classes, to be more in tune with the various styles of learning that Anglo students bring to a classroom where timely, sensitive, and controversial subject matter is being presented.
You have your own ideas, worldview, thought about what is going on. You have buttons that are being pushed in you, and you become defensive and feel like you want to take a hammer and hit people over the head to make them, come around. I think that's when you lose the entire class and the group. So the first thing I think is that you know yourself, where you don't get defensive, where you respect the fact that this person is a product of their cultural conditioning. They have a view of the world that is different from mine. Does that mean this person is any less worthy of what's going on?
You have to allow, as Dr. Sue said, for the developmental process to unfold, to understand where they're coming from culturally, socioeconomically, educationally, and then kind of gently allow them to, by listening, by being validated by the responses of other people, kind of understand and fall into the right side of the thinking.
Paint wars on my cheeks. Anoint me with cocoa oil and cum so I speak in tongues, twist it so tight they untangle my mind. Hold my head in hand. Bless it. Slice it. Leave a cross on its tip. Mark of the right. Initiation to the fight.
I have a big attraction to poetry. It is my love. I write songs, and that's what I use as lyrics. What was a little uncomfortable for me was to hear the expression of gay love through poetry.
My name's Daniel. I know they were angry and everything, that's why they were using that language, but after a while, it's, got to the point where you lost my respect because they were just cussing so much.
Oh, let me ask you something, Dan. I can appreciate what you're saying about the fact that you were turned off by the language. You would have appreciated if the expletives had been kind of wiped out of that. But what else did you get aside from the language? Was there anything that you felt sympathetic with or comfortable with, or was the language just so much that it kind of obliterated for you the experience?
What I got was their fear of speaking out. A lot of it had to do with just they're afraid to express their opinions and stuff.
Okay, well, you make a good point, Daniel, in the sense that one of the things that you got from the movie, which I think was key, which was really crucial, and one of the reasons why Marlon Riggs made this, and as you heard him say, silence equals death, which in part is one of the things that the gay community talks about in terms of being able to talk about the impact that AIDS has had on their community. So you did, although the language might have turned you off a bit, seem to have gotten the underlying message here, and that is you have to be who you are, you have to grapple with these issues, so otherwise you die, and not just physically but psychologically and emotionally. You become non-entities, and I think that's one of the points that Marlon Riggs was making. He no longer wanted to be invisible or a non-entity.
I would imagine people would respond eventually.
In their final comments, faculty reviewed their experiences in facilitating difficult dialogues and suggest additional strategies to encourage student participation, both in the electronic classroom and face-to-face.
When you begin to ease the message in and the affective elements that are going on, they are more likely to be receptive to it. And I see that happening. But it is a developmental process, and how much you push is crucial, how much you pull back. And that's why the interplay between pushing for the feelings and going to the content, you're always going back and forth in some sense to deal with it.
One of the things, ironically, that I've learned probably in the last year or so has been the withholding of my own affect to be able to get the students to discharge theirs. I'm so proud of myself now because you'll never know necessarily how I'm feeling on anything, but it seems to make for a much better environment in the classroom because they speak more to each other and worry less about having to fall in line with what the professor says.
One of the things about process that I learned in this project is that we began in the fall using groups as a safe place to test out ideas before we ask students to talk about them across the distance of distance learning, before we ask them to talk about it in the whole class. That seemed to improve the quality of the conversation in the classroom tremendously.
There are some people who are not going to talk. What does that silence mean? How does it impact the classroom? How do you deal with it as an instructor? Because that silence is very loud.
And have the students write either in class or an out of class free write on a topic, particularly those students who English is not their first language. They may be foreign exchange students. They don't have all of the content background, the context for much of what's happening in class. And my interest, and I'm sure that, the rest of us, our interest is in creating an arena of inclusion for the students. So if you don't mind, I'm going to move you folk up here so you can work with some.
Learning how to create an arena of inclusion is an evolving process, as the faculty in this innovative study discovered. Still, all agreed that helping students move beyond the discomfort of their differences to fully engage in difficult dialogues greatly enriches the classroom experience.
Funding for this program was provided by the Annenberg CPB project.
With additional support from California State University at Hayward.
For information on this program and others in the Annenberg CPB collection, call 1-800-LEARNER.